In this lesson, we are going to clone code from a remote GitHub repository to our local repository. Locally, we will make some changes on top of the code. We will commit that to our local repository and finally push it to the remote repository in GitHub so that the code in GitHub is also gets updated. We will perform these steps hands-on. While doing that, we will explain the key concepts as well. So let's get started. I have logged into GitHub Desktop and here I have the default view. As I am logged into GitHub also, it is showing me the repositories. Post login to my GitHub Desktop, this is the default screen. In case I want to clone a repository, I need to go to File, click Clone Repository. Now here we have three options: clone from github.com, GitHub Enterprise and URL. For URL, if I want to clone a particular repository, I need to get the URL from the repository itself. For that, let me go to my GitHub account. So I'm inside my GitHub account. If I just want to see all my repositories, this too I have. Let me click on this. So first thing I need to clone a repo is the URL of this repository. Here, if I click on code button, I have two options. This is the HTTPS URL. Let's copy this, go back to GitHub Desktop. Here, I can paste this URL. At the bottom, I have the local path. By default, it is showing this location, but I'm going to change it. I have this dedicated directory where I want to keep my project. Copy this path, go back to GitHub Desktop. Just change the initial part of the path, keeping the project name as is. Click clone. Now here, few things to notice. On the left hand side, it is showing the current repository as the project name, branch is main, fetch origin, never fetch, because we just cloned it. If I go to history, what it is showing, the available commits. Whenever the project was updated or uploaded in GitHub, what are the commits that were made? Now what we are going to do, we are going to make some code changes and then we are going to push it back to the remote repository. Before that, let's understand some basics. Now, what is this clone and what it does? Basically, it creates a local copy of the entire repository. Just we saw now from GitHub, we created a local copy in our system and it contains files, commit history, branches and tags, everything. Now it's done from an existing remote repository, which is usually called origin, and permissions are required in some cases based on the remote repository you are using. And definitely, unless you are cloning your own repository from GitHub Desktop where your URL are already shown, you need a dedicated URL just to get that repo from the remote repository. Now, if we try to visualize our system, our PC, we have GitHub Desktop there. We have the GitHub origin, the remote repository, and we have some code over there. What we did, we just cloned it into our local system. The local repository got created, and going ahead, the default directory that got created is the working directory. Here, the code has come. So we will make changes over there and then push it back to the remote repository. Let me go back to GitHub Desktop. Now here, I want to make some changes and push it to the remote repository. Now, from GitHub Desktop, we don't make the changes, right? It can only help us in checking in the file, pulling and pushing and all. We have to do it from some editor. Here, what we can do, if I go to changes, on the right hand side, it is showing you some options. Open in Notepad++ or show in Explorer, etc. Now, to make this example bit realistic, I want to open it in some editor. For that, let me go to File, Options, Integrations. Here, the external editor is mentioned, which is Notepad++. If I click the drop down, I have IntelliJ IDEA, but I want to open this code using VS Code. I don't have VS Code installed. I'll just install it within few seconds. I'll fast forward the installation and then we will try to open the code, the Python project actually, in VS Code from GitHub Desktop. Let me start the installation process and fast forward the recording. Installing the Python extension, done, close. Get back to GitHub Desktop. So still here the application is not shown. Click on cancel, close GitHub Desktop, open it again. Now if I go to File, Options again, Integrations, drop down, I have VS Code present here. Select this, click on Save. I can directly now open this in Visual Studio Code. Let me do that. It's asking to trust the location. Let me click on this button as well, close all this. So here it's a simple piece of code, a utility class where I have add and subtract method. Just for the sake of change purpose, I'm going to add another two methods over here, which is divide and multiply. Code added, Ctrl S, save. Let's go back to GitHub Desktop. Here it has started showing me the changes. It is already staged. Let me add a commit message, commit to main. Now we have committed it to the local repository. If you see over here, it is asking me push commits to origin remote. You have one local commit waiting to be pushed to GitHub. Click on push origin. Pushing. The code push is done. Let me go back to the GitHub repository from the browser. If I refresh the page, I can see the latest commit message. Open the file, and here our changes are getting reflected. So what we did, we just cloned the repository, we made some local changes, committed it to our local repository, and finally pushed it to remote. Now this is one way, like directly using the URL. There could be other ways also. As we discussed, if I click on clone repository, we use this particular tab. Now in case we are logged into our own account and there are repositories available, same way we can clone them. We can change the directory over here for the local path and click on clone. It will work. But keep one thing in mind, you can clone the repository, but while pushing your changes, you need to have the proper permission, the right permission, so that your changes could be pushed to the remote repository. Otherwise, all these three options, whether you're working with the github.com account or GitHub Enterprise or using some custom URL, the process is same. That's all for this lesson.